Thanks for joining us. I'm Nancy Furness, and this is We've Got Issues. Our interview today is taking place at Coquitlam City Centre Library, and we'd like to thank the library for providing us a space to do these interviews. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Coquitlam First Nation. So we thank the Coquitlam people who continue to live on these lands and to care for the lands and the waters and all that lies above and below. So this afternoon, I'm joined by Dr. Rob Butler, who is a very well-respected and well-known ornithologist, artist, and most recently, author. So thank you so much for joining us today, Rob.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always fun to talk about birds.
Absolutely, and I know that when you come to the Tri-Cities, and you've been here on a number of speaking events, you pack the place, like you can't get close. The room is overflowing, so there's certainly seems to be an interest in the topics that you cover. And I think if we could maybe just start by talking about crows. What is the fascination with crows? Because you often speak about them.
You know, everybody seems to have a story about crows, and this has been a real change. It's taken place probably in the last maybe 30, 40 years. Prior to that, you know, crows were reviled. People hated them, and they shot them and did all kinds of nasty things to them. And then all of a sudden, it started to change. And I think what happened, it was actually the science that did this. The scientists starting to look at it, realizing, you know, how intelligent crows are, what they're capable of doing, and how kind of similar to us, it really got people interested in them. And so slowly we started to see this change. And so, yeah, you're right. Everybody now, well, not everybody loves crows.
Well, you either love or hate them, like you said. So where did your fascination with crows begin?
Mine started when I was about 15 years old.
Okay.
I was a young boy living in North Van, and I heard crows up in a tree. And being a kid, you know, curious and so on, I climbed this tree. And it was a very, very tall tree. And up I went and got up to the top of the tree, was peering into the nest, and there was a young crow in there that was a runt. It was a small one, and it had a crippled foot. It wasn't going to survive. So I took it just out of a whim and put it in my shirt, climbed down the tree, and arrived back home. And there I announced to my mother, we now have another roommate here, in this young crow. And so I reared it.
Your mom was...
She went along with it, yeah.
Oh,
my mother was very tolerant of all this. She was used to this, opening up the freezer and seeing dead birds lying there and all kinds of things.
She didn't know what she was starting when she said,
no.
Welcome that crow.
No, I named the crow Jake. So I raised him. It took about a month or so for it to get to the size where it could start to fly. So I taught it to fly and eventually let it go. And I thought it would go back to its family and everybody would live happily ever after. Well, Jake was kind of used to us and used to hang around. And so I was fascinated in them. And then shortly after that, I got a job as a park naturalist working with BC Parks. And it was up on an island, Mitlenatch Island.
Right.
And there, one of the fellows was doing a kind of an inventory of all the plants and animals on the island. And he said, why don't you have a look at the crows, do something with them? And so I did. I actually published a scientific paper while I was just starting my undergraduate. And then that led to a graduate degree. To study crows. Yeah, so it just kept going, and here we are 50 years later, still fascinated
still
by that.
Passionate about crows.
Yeah, there's new things coming out all the time about them. They're fascinating animals.
Yeah, well, and you know, you said everybody has a story about crows. I was just speaking to somebody last night, and they were telling me their crow story. They said that during this hot weather, they'd been putting out like a saucer of water, and that this crow had been coming to see them every day, and dropping food in there, I guess, to soften the food up, and then eating it. Like they had a chocolate chip muffin one day, and you know, things like that. But then they noticed after a little while that the crow was bringing chicken bones and leaving. Like the first night left a little chicken bone, the next night was a larger one, and the next night, you know, another one. So I'm wondering, like crows, as you say, the science shows that they're intelligent, right? Do crows show gratitude?
Well, people have said this for a long time, you know, that crows leave gifts, and there's lots of examples of it, anecdotes and things, so you have to take that, you know, that there's probably something to this. It could be that some crows do it and some of them don't.
Oh, okay.
But I
just
decided,
like humans.
Yeah, so I decided to do the same thing. I had a crow around at our house, and I gave it a little bit of food, and it kept coming down. And then I put colored buttons out. I thought I'll give them a range of buttons, different colors, and see what happens. no interest. So then I tried coins, different
Oh.
coins, no interest. And you may know the story about the thieving magpie. Magpies are related to crows. That opera of Rossini's, in which the housemaid is accused of stealing the
Right,
silverware,
right.
and then right at the end, before she's to be executed, they realize it's the magpie. They steal. Well, they've actually done experiments on this with magpies, and magpies don't do this. They don't go and take bright objects. A lot of people think that crows and
They're
magpies do
attracted
it.
to the shiny.
My crows didn't do it, but it doesn't mean maybe that other ones aren't, because I've heard similar kinds of stories. Why they would do it, I don't know. I don't quite understand that. If they connect that together, those two, it could be more coincidental. You know, it came and it just left the bone because it got something else, got the water and just left. I don't know. But
Interesting. So it might be a mystery for a little while.
it's a mystery for somebody to go and explore and find out. Give us the answer. Yeah.
Well, I know I have a personal crow story that several years ago, again, when we were having that heat dome, my daughter and I were driving along and we saw a crow like on the grass, open grassy area with the wings splayed open and his beak was open, and we thought that crow looks really visibly distressed.
Mm-hmm.
So we happened to have like a little cup in the car and we filled it with water and put it out. And that crow, after we backed off a respectable distance, came up, took that cup in his beak and dragged it into the shade where there was another crow, and I honestly, it was like that crow was taking care of the other crow. Do they have those kind of relationships
Yes.
where they look after each other, or are they form communities, or?
Yeah, it's very complex, as you can
Okay.
imagine. But the general thing is that crows, the social unit is the family. So there's the mother and father and their young ones. They're not very successful, by the way. Only about half the nests are successful.
Like
have young.
raising,
Yeah,
okay.
so most of them fail. So they're not very good. And they steal each other's eggs and young. It's all kinds of stuff that goes on. It's a whole dynamic there. But so that's the general thing. And so every about 500 meters or so along your street, there's probably another crow nest. And there's a pair there, and each one has their own family, just like us. You know, you got your house, your townhouse or something. And you got your neighborhood. We discovered just the last, just over a year ago, we saw a fight that took place, and oftentimes crows fight because of their territories. They're trying to keep it. But this became a group thing where all the crows got together and picked on this one crow.
Oh.
And so what this is suggesting is that the whole neighborhood has an interest in the outcome of this fight.
Right, so they're working collaboratively.
Yeah, and it's called coalitional fighting, and it goes on in primates and in dolphins. In primates, they will oust the alpha male. They'll get together ones that are lower down, and they get together and oust them. And they've seen this among crows in captivity, where lower ranking ones will oust them. And this seemed to be the same thing going on
like a
here,
coup.
perhaps. Well, yeah, in a way. Or a crow is trying to get in, trying to settle in the
intruder.
neighborhood, and the whole neighborhood says, oh, no, you're not. They're quite content to sort of maintain, as Jason D'Souza at CBC said, it's called the status quo.
Status crow.
So there's something more complex, and now that we see this, it opens this whole thing up about, well, is there a much bigger unit? Is there a whole community that is also trying to maintain the status in that area? So yeah, there's lots of new things. That's what's so fascinating about it. I've been studying them for 50 years, and I've seen all kinds of fights between individual crows. But to see something like that,
Yeah, cooperation.
yeah, there's something much deeper going on.
That's interesting. And now I know Still Creek in Burnaby. We're in the Tri-Cities, and Burnaby's pretty close to us, so we can go and see this phenomena. There's a roosting area. Like I've heard, there's up to 10,000 or more crows.
Yep.
And so they all go there in the evening, and they leave at dawn. Where do they go, and why are they going to Still Creek?
Well, that's a good question. That roost formed about 1973. We were actually watching them, and the crows were roosting outside the city. And then all of a sudden it switched, and they started to roost down there. And there was about 2,000 crows at that time. It's now upwards of about 13 to 15,000.
Wow.
There's one up in the valley reportedly having about 50,000 crows in it. So there's even bigger ones.
Wow.
Where they come from this is sort of the outer boundary here in Coquitlam. So they're going all the way to Still Creek.
So they come out to Coquitlam?
Yeah.
Okay.
And going south, they're down into North Richmond and all of Vancouver, out to Point Grey. They all come down to that single roost, and from the North Shore. And it's a distance of about a 20-minute flight. You think of this in the middle.
As the bird fly, as the crow
As the crow flies, yes. If you think about it, during the winter, they have a very short time, maybe about 8 hours of feeding. And about an hour of that is taken up in commuting down and back, maybe a little bit less, but so they're down to about 7 hours. They've got to find food for the rest of the time they're there, and yet they all do it. So the question is, why would they do this? Fly all that distance. Yeah. And we don't really know exactly why. There's been all kinds of hypotheses and things on. I think what it might be is because of owls, particularly great horned owls.
Oh,
so as we move out into the countryside, further away from the city, you start to encounter great horned owls. And you can tell by their response. If a crow finds a great horned owl, they just go nuts.
Do they collaborate, cooperate again?
Yeah, they all come in and they chase it. They're really upset about it. And I think this is why the great horned owls, they have a distinctive way of killing them. They decapitate them.
Oh, well, that's reason enough to
Yeah,
walk together and find a safe
so you
space.
think
Wow.
a crow lives maybe a dozen years, 15 years when it's by the time it's an adult. So you think going down there every night is probably
a lot of energy.
You only get to die once,
Yeah.
but you can go down to that roost and you may be a little bit hungry or whatever, but at least you're alive.
Well, it's an amazing sight to see when in dusk they come in, and it's just like they're on the telephone wires, they're roosting on the ground, on anything they can get their...
I think everybody in Vancouver and the surrounding areas has to see this.
Yes.
The best time is between October and March because all the crows are there at that time. When they're breeding, they're off on their territories and things, and you don't get as many.
October to March.
So through the winter, and all you have to do is just go down to Still Creek, park your car, and wait, and it is just absolutely phenomenal. There is an interesting thing that's taken place we've just discovered, just down on United Boulevard behind...
Oh, so in Coquitlam.
Yeah, just behind there. There's a summer roost. And a lot of the crows from where I live in New West and here in Coquitlam, they fly down there. And I think what it is that the young crows can't make the flight all the way to Burnaby and back. So they just go, a kilometer or two down to this location.
That's interesting. So they have sort of a sub-community here, a smaller...
a summer roost, there's lots of crows, thousands of them down there. But you go down in the evening and you'll see it. It's down the end of Valentine Road. Is sort of the best spot to see them. There's a little park down there.
Again, is there a certain time of the year for that particular?
Yeah,
it would change, right?
It's in the breeding season, so once the crows are capable of flying, which is now, so from roughly end of June into October, they use it, and then all of a sudden it switches, and they all go down to the
so you have to know the dynamics a little bit there.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about crows and how they maybe or maybe not communicate with humans. How do they communicate with each other? Because it seems they have a very complex hierarchy and relations. How do they communicate? Yeah,
there's been quite a few studies on this. So I initially, when I was studying them over 50 years ago, I thought, well, this is the first thing to find out. Like, what do all these calls mean? Because that will tell you all about their social behavior. You hear a call, you know what they're saying. And it became so complex. We found out that they were using the same call in different contexts. The one thing that did come out was that if there was an approaching predator from the air, like an eagle or a red-tailed hawk, the call is slightly higher in pitch. And the ones that are like raccoons or dogs, and if it's lower, it's it's down a little bit. Your ear has to get used to it, but there is a difference. And other people have detected this too. So there's some things like that. But the people that have studied this have said that they also respond depending who's giving the call. So, if you're a really important crow, then the others will
okay,
I'm
pay
gonna,
attention.
if it's one of the others, they say,
Really?
And so they don't react the same, and it's the same call, but
those are the nuances that only somebody who's familiar with.
Yeah, or if you have them marked, the crows are marked with a band or something.
They band them?
Yeah, some people have done that, put color bands on, so you can see which crow is which one in the hierarchy. So the tendency is that the males, they hold these territories, and they're very aggressive, and everybody is subordinate to them. Their mates, the females are, and they will wait for the male to do the first thing before she does it. And then under that would be the yearlings, so those are like the teenagers from the previous year, and then at the bottom would be the young ones.
Right.
So.
Oh no, that's super interesting. And for people who haven't done a lot of crow watching, do you have some tips? Like, what do you look for, or how do you find crows in your neighborhood? Like, what are some tips?
It's interesting that when we had COVID-19 and you had the lockdown, everybody stay at home, we're all walking around our neighborhood. And so my wife and I decided, this is a chance to really look at the crows carefully in our neighborhood.
Get to know the crows in your own neighborhood.
Yeah, so what I did is, as I walked around, I just noted where I saw crows. And after a while, you realize, that crow is always there. Then I noticed this one that's got a lame wing, and it's always in the same place. And it's only like a few hundred meters here or there, and for 4 or 5 years now, it's always in the same place.
Survives.
Yeah, it survives. Yeah, it gets through. And you realize there's a crow here, and then if you listen in the springtime, you can hear the females begging on the nest. They go, eh, eh, eh. So you, oh, there's a nest. So now you found the nest.
So
or
the females are in the nest and they're begging
begging
for
to the
male
males.
to bring the food back
Yeah.
to feed the, oh.
Yeah, and then later on the young ones are in there and they're doing the same thing. So you can locate all the nests. And you know, you just keep track, make a little map of it, and before you know all the crows, and you can identify some of them by these, you know, if they've got lame legs or wings. There's a lot of injuries. A lot of crows get injured. So yeah, you
I
can
guess
tell
they're
them all apart.
urban birds and they're kind of sometimes, and they're also exposed to a lot of interactions, and so injury, the potential for injury
Yeah.
is certainly there.
They feed along the roadside a lot. People think they take a lot of birds' eggs, and they do if they're given the opportunity, but the studies are really pointing to the Steller's jay as the major culprit, because the Steller's jay skulk around through the undergrowth. The crows tend to be up on top, and
Okay.
the crows will take them. They're opportunists, but they're mostly feeding on insects and garbage.
Okay, so you have told us sort of a special story that you have about a relationship with a crow when you were quite young. Do you have any other stories? Like, is there a special crow during your career that kind of stood out as doing something different, or being especially, you know?
Well, I can tell you one recently. So we had a crow that came around our house, nests nearby, and we were watching it, and had a nest just behind the neighbors. And I could tell which one it was because he was missing a toenail. So up close to my binoculars, I could see, you know, it's that same crow. He's missing a toenail. And it was around for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. And it would go in the backyard and walk along the roof and do what crows do. And then one day, I saw it in our apple tree. And I thought, you know, it's sort of odd. It's not a big apple tree, and it's perched up there eating an apple. It's a bit odd. And I realized its wing was limp and hanging. And I thought, oh boy,
This
been
is
hit.
a different one than the one you talked about with the injury.
Yeah, it's a different one.
Okay.
Yeah. So it had this injured wing. So I went out to have a look, and you know, it couldn't fly. It moved up the branch and all that. So I thought, I went back inside, and we had salmon the night before, and had a little piece of salmon. And so I walked out there, and it moved away. And I put the salmon down, and then it went back, and it came down, and he got the salmon. And I thought, he's not going to survive. And eventually he made his way down and got onto I know it was a male, because he was the dominant one around the house.
Oh, okay.
And I saw him go up the street, and I thought, you know, a cat or a dog or a coyote, something's going to get him. He's not going to last. But he survived. And gradually his wing healed. It's still limp, so I can tell it's him. But he comes around, and he's still hanging around, and he reproduced this year, and they have a young one. And he's not very good at flying, and you can see his wing. I don't know if he goes to the roost each night or not, but he's around, and
It's
he's hanging in there.
interesting how you get to know the crows, like in your own neighborhood, and it's, you know, you get to follow them and stuff. And you said they live to be about 12 or 14?
Yeah, once they're adults, you know, like I said, half the nests fail, and then once the young come out, there's a pretty high mortality in their first year as well.
So you could have a long-term relationship with the
pretty
crow in
long.
your
Yeah.
neighborhood. Can you tell us, like, what can we learn from crows, or do you have any lessons that you've learned
Well,
from crows?
you know, I think the main one on this, Nancy, is that, you know, people say, you know, these animals, they're just like us. And I like to think of it, well, actually, we're just like them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we're discovering with all kinds of studies. And this is what happened with the crows. As we studied them, we realized, you know, they're not that different from us, and maybe we should have a different level of respect for these.
Right.
And this has happened with, you know, bears and wolves, and it's starting to happen with sharks, and it's happened with crows, you know, that we're starting to see things very differently. And I think as we study more and more of these things, we realize, you know, we're animals too, and you know,
Yes.
we have some things that we're very good at, but some we're not. We're not great at seeing things or hearing things. Our sense of smell, they would have a whole different perception of the world. But we aren't that far different from many of these animals. And if we start thinking of it that way instead, that we're similar to them, we see it as a continuum of things, of animals having different skill sets and things, and we may be at this end on, you know, our rational thinking, but when it comes to things like, you know, a sense of smell, we're way down here. Our cats are better at it than we are. And we're on that continuum, you know.
I think you're right, and it gives us a sense of respect. And once we have respect and we care and we
That's right.
understand a little bit better, we will hopefully be a little bit better at protecting our environment and, you know,
Exactly.
sharing creating this space.
Yeah, once
because-
we realize that we're all part of it, we're all together in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of opened it. And the other thing too is that because the crows are everywhere around the city, everybody knows them. Everybody knows
Everyone
what a
has
crow
an
is.
opportunity to learn.
Yeah, and I like to think of them as a gateway to nature, that once you start to look at the crows, then you start looking at other ones. And I've had lots of people who have done this. They started looking at the crows differently, and then they said, I've noticed all these other things around. I didn't know they were around you. And you realize that there's a whole world of untold stories, all this stuff in nature that's going on around us.
Oh, I love
and
it.
we're completely oblivious to it.
Right. It just opens that doorway.
Yeah, yeah.
Ah.
That's what's so much fun about it, when new students coming on, new people studying and finding new things. They just discovered just a few weeks ago that the painted lady butterfly, some of them fly across the Atlantic,
Wow.
right across the ocean, like the whole thing, and they just get the winds and they carry them all
They
the way
get
across.
up in the jet stream and across.
Well,
or-
in the trade winds,
the
probably,
trade
bringing
winds,
them all the way across.
Wow, I know there's so little we know. We don't even know what we don't know.
Well, we see those and we go, wow. And we think, boy, these are really incredible animals. Well, they are, but they do it as a sort of matter of fact. They do this all the time.
Well, and you're a scientist, but you're also an artist, like a good artist. Can you
thank you.
talk a little bit about that? Like, what's the connection there? Is being an artist, does that sort of make you a better scientist, or were you an artist first, and then, or does being a scientist make you a better artist? Because you both require a high level of observation and detail, and just really thinking about things.
Yeah, it was very interesting. The start of my career actually started in art, because I was pretty good at
So
this
the
kind
art
of
came
stuff.
before the crow.
No, I had the crow.
Oh, the
I was
crow was-
interested in nature and things, but I was illustrating nature.
Okay.
And my wife is a very accomplished artist, and she introduced me to a few people. It was the fellow who was the art director of Expo '86.
Oh,
and he
okay.
said, I like what you're doing, let's promote this. And he got me into Westworld magazine, and out of that I got into a gallery, and then it just took off. And I had
Wow.
all these commissions and all this. And so it was kind of, and I thought, can I make a living at this? And I was doing, pretty well then, but I really do like the science. And at the same time, I was just finishing up my undergraduate. I was offered a graduate degree in biology. And so which one am I going to do?
know, it's-
And I thought, well, science is probably a more secure one. And I can continue to do art and
And
things.
you
there.
have,
I have,
right?
yeah. We have a show going on right now.
You
a group
do?
of 8. Yep.
Oh, where is
It's
this?
it's over in Sydney at the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea. So it's a year-long show, and so the whole exhibition space. There's 8 of us. We formed a thing called the Group of 8, a little
Oh,
cheekily, way back 40 years ago. And we thought at the 40-year reunion we should all get together, and the centre in Sydney agreed to put the exhibition on. So it's there, and it's all about the Salish Sea and hope for the Salish Sea and
Oh.
all the positive stories that come
Sounds
out.
like something worth making a trip over to see.
It's fun, yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the artists are there, they're coming and going and giving lectures and techniques, showing you techniques and all that. So
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's fun.
And you also have another side now. You are a novelist.
yeah,
I have just finished reading Letters from Gerald,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, this is it, yeah.
a really interesting story because it's got the ornithology, it's got a little bit about art, but it also explores some of the challenges and barriers, social and cultural barriers faced by women and
Yeah.
others. So it's got so many different themes running through it. Can you tell us a little bit about the book without giving away any of the secrets?
yeah, there's a big surprise on it, as you know. Where this came about was early in my career. I worked for the Canadian Wildlife Service, and early in my career they said, what's going on in England with the public programs and what they're doing for conservation.
Right.
You should go and have a look at it. The Royal Society for Protection of Birds was the organization, and they're bigger than all of the political parties' memberships combined.
So there's
Their
a
membership.
huge love of
Yeah,
birds.
the British love
Brit-
birds.
yeah.
And so I went over there for a month to learn how they did this. How did they take it from this small organization into this big, and get all these conservation programs going there and elsewhere in the world? How did they do this? I toured around through all of the reserves and things. And the fellow that I met there, we became fast friends and had many trips back and forth. So that became the basis. So I knew the country well. I knew how conservation was done and how the science was done. But I also was coming up through the science side, and I saw what happened to women in those. How difficult it was.
Yes.
You're in a man's world, and there's all the social things that go on and all that. And I have a couple of daughters, and you see all of this sort of stuff going on. It's all changing and getting better now, but back then it was pretty tough. And so I thought, I just woke up one morning and I said to my wife, I've got a story. And I started
are you serious? So it just...
Yeah, and I just had this premise of the story, and I said, what do you think about that as a storyline? And she said, well, yeah, that'd be fantastic. So each morning I'd wake up with a new chapter, and I'd go and type out a chapter.
Oh, really?
And 3 months later, the book's done, and it's all there. So it's got all the stuff to do with, it's a historical novel.
Yes.
So many of these things actually happen.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of little hidden things in it, like one of the characters says to Eleanor, who's the protagonist, do you know James Bond? And I just left it there because Ian Fleming, who was writing the first, Casino Royale with the 007 with James Bond, there was a James Bond who was an ornithologist who wrote the Birds of the West Indies.
So there are many levels, like depending on...
little things like that in there, yeah. And there's episodes in the where one of the characters goes to a pub, the fox and the crow. That's an Aesop's fable.
Yes.
Out there, right? And she becomes the fox, and outfoxes the crow. So there's all those little hidden stories in it as well.
Oh no! It was a wonderful book. It was a delight to read.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Where can you get the book? I got mine at an event that you held, and I know you were signing, but where can we find it?
Well, right here in the Backyard Bird Store in
Port Moody?
in Newport Village.
Yes.
They have copies there, so you can just buy one there. You can get it online. It's at all the usual things, Amazon and Indigo, or Friesens, who's the publisher. You can get it there, or I've come to one of my events.
Yes, and I think we'll see you back out in the Tri-Cities at some
in
more
October.
events in the future.
Yeah. One thing too, I had this little bookmark, so this is kind of fun. I had a designer friend of mine who did. Yeah, so this is Eleanor.
Oh, and there's her.
You know about the robin?
Yes,
yeah, we won't give it away.
Yes.
And all the books in the back are the books that she talks about, her binoculars, all this. This has got the whole story kind of tied up.
I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to let anything.
No, but if people want a bookmark, they can just flick me an email. I'll send them a bookmark. But you can pick up the book too if you want. And like I say, it's online. It's also an ebook. You can get it through as Kindle or a soft cover or hardcover, whatever you like. But I'll be speaking here in October at the Burke Mountain Naturalists on crows, the enchantment of crows.
We are looking forward to that. So October, it's, all I can say is people are coming, come early, because the room does fill up. Like you get overflowing crowds. So. We'll look forward to seeing you. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come out and talk to us today. And I really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better and learning more about crows.
Yeah. It's always fun to talk crows or birds.
Yes.
Anytime, Nancy. Yeah.
For sure. Thank you. And I hope we can chat again in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us. We've been speaking with Dr. Rob Butler, and he's been telling us all about crows, which is a very popular subject here in the Tri-Cities, and also his new book, Letters from Gerald. Thank you.